My office is a glass cage suspended 40 stories above the city. I like it that way. From up here, the people scuttling along the streets are just specks, a distant, muffled hum of activity. It's clean, uncomplicated. My desk is a single slab of polished black marble, completely clear except for my laptop and a single folder. The file inside details the financial ruin of a man named Mr. Kinney. His family's restaurant, a place that's been on the same corner for 3 generations, is about to be mine. He missed his last payment by 3 hours. The terms of our agreement are quite clear on the matter of timeliness. Some people might call me a vulture, a loan shark. I've heard it all, usually whispered by people who lack the spine to say it to my face. I see myself as a realist. I provide a service that banks won't touch. I offer a lifeline to people who are already drowning, and I'm very clear about the cost. They sign the contract. They know the terms. It's just business, a transaction. The world is a tough place, and you either learn the rules or you get crushed by them. I didn't make the rules. I just learned to play the game better than anyone else. This philosophy has afforded me this view, this marble desk, this life where I am beholden to no one. It's a fortress built on well-managed risk and the predictable desperation of others. I sleep just fine at night. I wasn't always the one holding the signed contracts. I remember another life, another city, another me. I was 12, and our home smelled of my mother's baking and the lemon polish she used on our secondhand furniture. It was small and cluttered with love, but it was ours, until it wasn't. I remember a man in a cheap suit sitting at our kitchen table. He never raised his voice, but his words were like stones, each one landing with a heavy thud that shook our world apart. He spoke about interest rates and default clauses, words that meant nothing to me then, but whose consequences I would come to understand with brutal clarity. My father, a man who could build anything with his hands, just sat there, shrinking in his chair. He'd taken a loan to expand his carpentry business, a loan from a man just like the one I am now. He'd seen an opportunity, a chance to build something better for us, but a single turn of bad luck, a client who didn't pay, and the whole house of cards came down. We lost everything. The house, the business, my father's spirit. The shame ate him alive, from the inside out. I learned the most important lesson of my life in that cluttered, blooded home as it was being packed into boxes by strangers. You are either the one with the pen, or you are the one being signed away. There is no in-between. That fear, that absolute gut-wrenching helplessness of watching my family be erased by a signature on the piece of paper, I vowed I would never feel that again. It wasn't about revenge. It was about control. It was about building a fortress so high that no one could ever touch me again. Today, Mr. Kinney came in to sign the final transfer. He was a ghost in a worn-out polo shirt, his eyes hollowed out. He didn't beg or plead. He was long past that. He just sat silently across my marble desk, his hands trembling slightly as he held the pen. As he signed away his family's legacy, I felt the usual nothing. A satisfying click of a lock falling into place, a problem resolved, a deal concluded. But then, for a split second, the hum of the city outside my window seemed to die. In the sudden dead silence, I thought I heard a whisper. It was faint, thin, like the hiss of a radio between stations, and it seemed to form a single word from right behind my ear. Justify. I flinched, my eyes darting around the empty office. There was no one. The city's noise rushed back in, and Mr. Kinney was looking at me, his expression unchanged. I dismissed it. Stress. The mind plays tricks. The feeling lingered, though, a cold spot in the air-conditioned quiet of my drive home. I was in my Maserati, the engine a low growl, the city lights smearing into ribbons of neon across the rain-slicked windshield. This was my sanctuary, a capsule of Italian leather and polished steel that screamed success. It was a tangible asset, a declaration of my victory. I turned up the volume on a Bach concerto, trying to drown out the echo of that impossible whisper. It was illogical, a trick of the acoustics in my minimalist office. I repeated the word to myself. Justify. It was easy. I provide liquidity in a tight market. I accept risks others won't. I operate within the legal framework of every contract I write. My justification was the very foundation of my life. That's when I glanced at the rearview mirror to change lanes. For a heartbeat, it wasn't my own face looking back at me. It was Mr. Kinney's. Not the defeated man from my office, but a version of him twisted in agony, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes burning with an accusation that felt ancient and absolute. And behind him, reflected in the glass, the back seat of my car was filled with faces. All the faces I had ruined, all the people I had signed away, their features warped by despair and disbelief. Mrs. DaCosta from the bakery, the young couple who lost their startup, the old man who lost his home. They were all there, a silent, spectral chorus of my success. I slammed on the brakes, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. The Maserati fishtailed on the wet road, tires screeching. The car behind me blared its horn, a sound that ripped me back to reality. I looked again. The mirror showed only the empty back seat, and my own wide, terrified eyes reflected in the glass. I told myself it was a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by a long week. I had to get home, pour a drink, and let the rational world reassert itself. I pressed my foot on the accelerator, trying to outrun the image seared into my brain. My focus was shot, my hands were slick on the steering wheel. One moment, I was speeding through an intersection on a green light. The next, a massive truck was barreling through a red, its horn a deafening metallic roar that seemed to tear the world in half. There was a supernova of shattering glass, the violent shriek of twisting metal, and the sickening lurch of physics failing me completely. Then blackness, an absolute crushing void. And then silence. No pain, no sirens. I opened my eyes not to the wreckage of my car, but to an endless expanse of gray. I was standing on a floor that was neither solid nor gas, in a chamber with no walls, no ceiling, no floor, just a uniform, featureless nothing that stretched into infinity. The air was cold, still, and utterly silent. My ears strained for a sound, any sound, but there was none. And I was not alone. It stood before me, perhaps 10 feet away. It was impossibly tall, a gaunt, 3-meter-tall silhouette that seemed stitched together from TV static in deepest night. It was humanoid, but its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid to be natural.
It didn't reflect light, it drank it, pulling the great emptiness into itself. It had no face, no features, just a single searing point of pure white light where a head should be. The light wasn't a comfort, it was an accusation. It was an eye that saw everything, and as it focused on me, a voice echoed not in the air, but directly inside my skull. It was not a voice of malice, but of cold, terrifying purpose. Dion, your audit has begun.
The gray nothingness around me solidified, resolving into a vast circular chamber made of cold, seamless stone. It felt like a courtroom and a tomb, and I was the only one on trial. The entity, my inquisitor, raised one of its impossibly long arms, and the stone wall in front of me flickered to life. It wasn't a screen, it was a memory. My first big score. A family, the DaCostas, who had taken a loan for their small bakery. I remembered it clearly. They were 6 weeks behind. The contract was clear. It was a simple business transaction. But the inquisitor wasn't showing me the memory as I remembered it. I was no longer in my sharp business suit sitting behind a desk. I was in their cramped apartment above the bakery, smelling the yeast and sugar of their livelihood. I was standing beside Mrs. DaCosta as she pleaded with a version of me that sat, implacable, at her kitchen table. I felt the raw, metallic taste of her panic, the crushing weight of her failure as she explained the faulty oven that had ruined a week's worth of product. I felt her husband's shame, the same soul-deep shame that had hollowed out my own father as he stared at his worn hands, unable to meet my eyes. I was inside their fear, drowning in it, experiencing the slow-motion collapse of their entire world. They weren't just losing a business, they were losing their identity, their future, the only home their children had ever known. The scene shifted, and I was back in my own body, watching them from across the table. The inquisitor paused the memory at the critical moment. Mr. DaCosta, his face ashen, had just slid a small velvet-lined box across the table, offering me his grandfather's watch, a last desperate token of collateral. "Please," he'd whispered, "just one more week." "Your memory of this moment is simple." The voice of the inquisitor echoed in my skull. "You refused. A pragmatic business decision. Liabilities are not assets. But your justification is a fortress built on sand. Look again. Look deeper." The memory played forward in agonizing slow motion. I saw my own hand wave dismissively at the watch. I heard my own voice, cold and steady, reciting the terms of the default clause. I watched the last glimmer of hope die in their eyes. It was the correct move, I thought, a desperate attempt to shore up my defenses. Emotion has no place in finance. They signed the contract. "You feel nothing for them," the voice stated. A flat observation. "But you feel something. You have simply relabeled it. You call it satisfaction. You call it control. Let us examine this feeling. Let us strip away the justifications and look at the thing itself." The inquisitor forced me to look closer, to push past the rationalizations and feel what I truly felt in that instant. It was like peeling back a scab to reveal the infected wound beneath.
Buried deep under the layers of self-deception was a flicker, a hot, thrilling pulse of something ugly and alive. It was power. Pure, unadulterated power over their lives. I felt the frantic, terrified beating of their hearts as a rhythm that steadied my own. I saw their world balanced on the knife's edge of my decision, and I relished the weight of it.
The Inquisitor wasn't finished. It forced the memory to rewind, to play the moment with the watch again and again. Each time, the sensation grew stronger, the layers of my justification peeling back to expose the raw nerve of the truth. My narrative of the pragmatic survivor, the woman who was just playing the game by its own harsh rules, was a lie. It was a story I told myself so I wouldn't have to look at my own reflection. The contract was a tool, the voice in my head stated, its tone unchanged. The rules were a shield, but the motive was not survival. The motive was not control. Look now, see what you truly are. The memory focused, tightening on my own face as Mr. DaCosta pushed the watchbox toward me. The Inquisitor stripped away everything else, the sound of their pleading, the smell of the bakery, the sight of their despair, and left only what was happening inside me. The hot, thrilling pulse I had felt was not just power, it was pleasure. It wasn't about enforcing a contract or protecting my investment. It was the joy of holding their fragile world in my hands and the savage satisfaction of crushing it. It was the predator's thrill, the deep, instinctual gratification of being the one who decides. It was the feeling I had craved ever since I had been the helpless child in my own collapsing home. I hadn't sought to prevent it from happening again. I had sought to become the one who made it happen. And then I saw it. The Inquisitor zoomed in on my face in the memory, and for the first time I saw myself as they must have seen me. I saw myself smile. It was a small, fractional thing, a barely perceptible twitch of the lips that lasted for less than a second, but it held all the cruelty in the world. It was a smile of utter contempt and absolute dominance. My carefully constructed fortress of justification, the entire narrative of my life, crumbled into dust. I wasn't a survivor. I was the man in the cheap suit. I was the shark, and I loved it. I screamed then, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the immense silence of the stone chamber. The memory shattered like glass, leaving me alone with the entity and the horrifying truth. No, I yelled into the void. It was business. I had to survive. But the words were hollow, pathetic lies even to my own ears. I tried to run, to turn away from the unwavering white light of the Inquisitor, but the gray floor was endless. There was no escape from what was inside me. The horror wasn't the entity. It was the unfiltered, undeniable truth of my own reflection. My justifications were gone. My story was a lie. All that was left was the ugly, naked truth of my own malice staring back at me from the depths of my own memory. The voice echoed in my head, not with judgment or anger, but with a final, devastating finality. It was not a question meant to be answered aloud. It was a verdict. I awoke to the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beep of a machine. My eyes fluttered open to a white ceiling, the light so bright it hurt. A hospital. I had survived the crash. For a moment, a wave of relief so powerful it felt like a rebirth washed over me. I was alive. I was still me. The gray place, the Inquisitor. It was a dream, a near-death hallucination, a trauma response from my brain. It had to be. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air tasted clean, real. A nurse walked in, a kind-faced woman in her late 50s. She smiled warmly when she saw my eyes were open. "Welcome back," she said, her voice soft. "You gave us quite a scare. You've been out for 2 days." The moment our eyes met, it hit me. It wasn't a thought or an observation. It was an avalanche. I felt the dull, chronic ache in her lower back from a double shift. I tasted the faint, lingering bitterness of her disappointment over a canceled vacation. I felt a sharp pang of anxiety about her son's tuition payment, followed immediately by a warm, fierce rush of love for him that was so strong it made my own eyes water. It poured into me, a tidal wave of another person's life, their pain, their joy, their quiet desperation. It was overwhelming, a cacophony of feeling that wasn't mine. "Are you all right?" she asked, her smile faltering as she saw the look on my face. Her concern was a fresh assault, a wave of gentle compassion that felt like acid on my skin. I flinched away, turning my head, but it was useless. I could feel the worry of the patient in the next room, the boredom of the security guard down the hall, the secret grief of the doctor at the nurse's station. I had been spared, but my fortress was gone. I was left with no walls, no defenses, no marble desk or glass cage to protect me. My punishment wasn't a cage, but the curse of perfect, unfiltered empathy. I had spent my entire life ensuring I would never again feel the helpless pain of my family's ruin. Now, I was doomed to feel the pain of everyone, and beneath it all, a faint, constant echo. The hollow despair of Mr. Kenny, the metallic panic of Mrs. DaCosta, the crushing shame of 100 others. They were a part of me now. Their ruin was my new reality. There is no one to justify it to anymore. There is no one left to hear it but me.
Thank you so much for watching or listening. The things that go bump in the night are hungry for attention. By liking and subscribing, you're telling me you want more. You're helping me bring even more chilling tales and terrifying content to life.